Saraswati Namastubhyam Varade Kamarupini Vidyarambham Karishyami Siddhir Bhavatu Me Sada Shruti Smriti Purananam Alayam Karunalayam Namami Bhagavat Padam Shankaram Loka Shankaram Purana Nyaya Mimamsa Dharma Shastranga Mishritaha Vedaha Sthanani Vidyanam Dharmasya Cha Chaturdasha Ayurvedo Dhanurvedo Gandharvaschaiva Tetrayaha Arthashastram Chaturthantu Vidyaha Ashtadashaivatah. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Namaste. I welcome everyone who has joined us today for this conversation titled The Tradition of Local Self-Government in Ancient and Medieval Tamil Nadu with Dr. Nanditha Krishna. The title of today's conversation is also the title of a chapter written by Dr. Krishna in the book India, the Mother of Democracy, released by the Indian Council of Historical Research, ICHR, in November 2022. In this paper, Dr. Krishna examines the operation of democratic forms of self-government as it prevailed in rural and urban Tamil Nadu, right from ancient times up to the span of time through which the Vijayanagara Empire continued to exist. Dr. Krishna is the author of several books on Indian art, culture, religion, and the environment, including Life Lessons from the Buddha, Life Lessons from Swami Vivekananda, Life Lessons from Mahavira, and Life Lessons from Adi Shankara. All of these books published by Aleph. Other books include Book of Vishnu, Book of Avatars and Divinities, Book of Demons, Hinduism and Nature, Sacred Plants of India and Sacred Animals of India, all published by Penguin, Paintings of the Varadaraja Perumal Temple, CPR Publications, Madras Then Chennai Now by Rodi, Ganesha and Balaji Venkateshwara and Ganesha, Vakils, painted manuscripts of the Saraswati Mahal Library, Government of Tamil Nadu, to mention a few. Besides several research papers and numerous popular articles, she is the recipient of several awards, including Nari Shakti Puraskar, Stri Ratna, and Outstanding Woman of Asia, and has a D.Lit from Vidyasagar University, West Bengal. She has recently been awarded the National Fellowship by the Indian Council of Historical Research. I welcome Dr. Krishna today for this conversation. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you and namaskar. Very happy to speak to INDICA and all its members on a subject which I think is very interesting, because I hope my sound is okay.
Yes, yes.
Because it is something that prevailed in all of India, democracy. And we talk about democracy today as if it was a foreign import, whereas it was not. We all know that we had the Janapadas in ancient India and North India. They are mentioned in Sanskrit literature, and they were republics. So public is Rex, king, the rule of the people. So it starts there. Before I begin on my lecture, I would like to first introduce Dr. G. Balaji, who is my co-author in this book. Dr. Balaji is the registrar and assistant professor at the CPR, Institute of Indological Research. He helped me tremendously in the course of this article which I wrote. I won't call it an article because it was a very heavily researched paper. And he helped me a lot, especially with all the Tamil references. I would also like to mention that at the recent G20, the Honorable Prime Minister of India, Shri Narendra Modi, did what we had written in the Uttaramerur inscription to show that democracy existed in ancient India. This was the 10th century that we are talking about. So I'm going to speak about the tradition of, just a second. local self-government in ancient and medieval Tamil Nadu. I start with a 10th century inscription of the Chola king Aditya Karikalan from Karapurishwara temple at Tiruparkadal, which talks about village administration and to a number of committees that comprise the Great Assembly of Kaveri Pakam. Now, the early sources, sorry, we have to make it. The early sources of information about Tamil history are, of course, the Ashokan inscriptions. And Ashoka says, everywhere in the dominions of King Devanama Priyadarsin and of those who are his borderers, such as the Choda, Pandya, Satyaputta. Now, Satyaputta, we know now today, are the Athiyaman kings of the region of Salem, and Kerala Putta, who are the Cheras. Sangam literature, of course, is Tolkappiyam, Pattu, Ettu Padinenkil Kanake, Shilapadiharam, Manimekale, which tells us, all these books tell us about administration. But I would like to say that from the beginning, there have been kings. The early Tamil grammatical work, the Tolkappiyam, refers to the three crowned monarchs as the Vendar. They were the Chera, Chora, and Pandya kings, respectively. The king was the center of the administration, and he was known as the Mannan, Vendan, Okotravan, Iraivan, Arasan, etc. in Sangam literature. Now, when we talk about South India, it's not modern, of Tamil Nadu, sorry, they are not modern borders that we are talking about. Because good bit of, say, Andhra Pradesh, Karnataka, those days you didn't have, it was only after the Vijayanagara period that all these became separate areas. In the Shilapadigaram, the term Murai Mudal Kattil meant that the throne was inherited by the eldest son as his right. Hence, the crown prince was known as Komahan. The younger princes were called Ilan. Ilan means young and Ko is prince. So you have Ilango Adihal was the author of the Shilapadigaram, also a Chera rule. There are no direct references to a queen ruling over any of the territorial divisions of ancient Tamil Nadu in Sangam literature. Now, just to introduce you to the ruling dynasties of Tamil Nadu, now the Cheras, they were established in 300 BCE, as you know. Ashoka has mentioned the Cheras. Today, Cheranade is part of Kerala and Nadu, the Coimbatore region in Tamil Nadu. The Adhiyaman or Satyaputto were also mentioned by Ashoka. They were chieftains in a part of Kongu Nadu till about the 8th century CE. The Pallavas were established. I'm not going into the origin of each dynasty, but we know that by 275 CE, we have references to the Pallavas, but they were also quickly disestablished, that is, overthrown by the Cholas by the 9th century. The Choras were established in 300 BCE, again from Ashoka's time, and probably much earlier. We are going by Ashoka because he has mentioned it. And the rest is Sangam literature, and as you know, literature we cannot date very easily. But by 300 BC, the Cholas had been established, but they really rose in the medieval period, in the 9th century. And the empire was at its greatest extent in the 11th century. Excuse me. When they went all the way up to Southeast Asia, their territory and their influence went all the way up to Southeast Asia. But by the 14th century, the Cholas had also been were on the downward path, and their kingdom, their empire had gone away. Pandyas were there in 300 BC, and it was at its greatest extent in the 13th century. There are some references that are not historical, and they go back to days of legends like that of Tadadakai, is likened to goddess Parvati, ruling over Madurai, that is mentioned in the Thiruvilayadal Purana. There is the reference. Now, this is an important reference which Megasthenes makes to Pandaya, being a daughter of Heracles, as the Greeks called Krishna. And according to him, she built and ruled Madurai, which is a very fascinating idea, but not a discussion for today. The ancient Tamil work, Paramori Nanu, a strange practice of choosing the kingdom is mentioned. Choosing the king is mentioned. A royal elephant chooses the king in a common crowd by garlanding him. It is said that Karikalan, the Sangam Chora king, was chosen in this way. And we know Karikalan existed because the Grand Anicut was built by him. But I doubt whether this actually ever happened. Scholars believe that in the Sangam age, there was no practice of an election, and there is no textual proof of the approval of the people for the chosen one. The coronation ceremony was called Mudisuttuvira or Arasu Kattil Erudal. A 10th century inscription of the Chora king Aditya Karikal. Okay, sorry. Where is it? Okay. Royal court was called Arasavai. Just a second. I'll just jump from here. See, I'll take this out.
Last slide.
Nadu Rukaminalia.
Raju. Raju.
Sorry, this got a little mixed up.
Manu.
I don't know what's happening. It's moving like this. See, it's moving up down. I'm sorry, I'm having some problem over here.
Take your time, Dr. Krishna.
It's going, the slides are moving every time I. This is the problem with the. I'll just go as in the order. The slides are going back and forth. When I go up and down, slides are moving. Any case. Okay, I'm sorry. I think, this is where technology lets you down. Does what it chooses to do. Okay. The royal court was called the Arasavai, and the public court in the village was called Avai or Sabai, which probably would have evolved from the Sanskrit word Sabha, which means an assembly. Many of the major decisions of the state taken by the king, as advised by his Avai. This court was distinguished and wise, and its duty was to advise the king and direct him in the proper course of government. Sangam literature mentions a few qualities of the Avai members, like good birth, good education, good conduct, truthfulness, so on. So they are supposed to have absence of envy or jealousy. I think these people would have been wonderful people, and lack of personal motives, promoting government affairs. Therefore, we can understand that some kind of public participation was there in the court of the king, and the decisions were not made unanimously by him, although he had the power to veto. The orders of the king, which concerned the people, were proclaimed throughout the capital city, the beat of drums by officers riding on elephants. Now, here I must mention that unlike in North India, where there were a lot of kings who did very arbitrary things, like you have good old Muhammad bin Tughlaq, who one day got up and decided to go from Delhi to Devagiri and then another day went back. You did not have kings who did such things in South India. Definitely not in Tamil Nadu. And this means that, we must have had kings who had bright ideas also, but they listened to their court, to their advisors, and went by the advisors. Now, the assembly consisted of two separate bodies, the Ain Perunku and the En Perayar, which are often mentioned as associated with the king. Ain Perunku consisted of 5, namely the representatives of the people, priests, physicians, astrologers, and ministers. This council of representatives safeguarded the rights and privileges of the people. The NPRIM consisted of 8 groups, that is, the representatives of accountants, executive officials of the secretariat, treasury, palace guards, elders from the city, chiefs of infantry, cavalry, and elephantry. But there is no information related to the selection or election of members, constitution, function, and powers of these bodies. It is remarkable that this system of government was followed in the 3 kingdoms of the Chera, Chola, and Pandya, although they were independent of each other. So I think that, whatever system they had, whether it was at the village council level or in the government level, it was something that was more a tradition of the region than followed by any specific kingdom. The division of classes, I'm not saying castes, classes amongst the Tamil, as described above, bears a striking resemblance to that of the ancient empire of Magadha. Now, local bodies in the Sangam period. Apart from these bodies, there were local bodies in the villages. Villages were the fundamental units of administration. Villages generally managed their own affairs, which were co-signed by the king's representative. We can see this system in the epigraphical records of the medieval period, starting from the 6th century CE. Although the king was the head of the state, he could not be present in all the places where he was needed. Hence, power was decentralized and certain regulations were framed to appoint officials for local administrative bodies who reported to the king. In connection with local self-government, we come across a few names which are mentioned in literature as assemblies: Mandram, Kodiyal, Ambalam, and so on. These are the different terms used to denote different types of assemblies. A 10th century inscription of the Chola king Aditya Karikalan Karapurishvara temple at Tirupparkadal also speaks about village administration. It refers to a number of committees that comprise the great assembly of Kaveri Pakam, alias Ammani Narayana Chaturvedi Mangalam. These were Samvatsara Varyam, Tota Varyam, Eri Varyam, Kalani Varyam for Agricultural Committee, Panchavara Varyam, Tax Collection Committee, Kanakku Varyam, Audit Committee, Kalinga Varyam, Irrigation Committee, and Tadavari Varyam, Toll Collection Committee. Besides these, the assembly included a general body of bhattas, the learned Brahmins of the village, the leader, the headman of the village, and the administrator. The last two were the representatives of the government in the village assembly. Mandram was an assembly beneath a tree, the center of the village. It could be attended by all the people who wished to take part in proceedings. Kodiyal was described as an open courtyard or enclosure of a shrine on the outskirts of the village or within its boundary, where strangers, pilgrims, and parners stayed. Ambalam and Avai seem to be similar, with a raised platform or a small building where dance performances also took place. We know that Chidambaram has the various Ambalams. In Kerala, they're still called Ambalams, platforms outside the temple. These public areas were used by the village assemblies to transact local business. The kingdom was not strictly divided into provinces, districts, or divisions, but there are references to show that such divisions for administrative purposes were not unknown. The kingdom itself was called Mandilam or Mandalam. The medieval period, it was referred to Mandalam, like Tonde Mandalam, Chora Mandalam, Pandya Mandalam, Chera Mandalam, and Kongu Mandalam. Now, the tolls and the taxes collected by the king were the land tax, tolls, and customs on imported goods. Imported goods could be from abroad, like from Rome and so on, or even outside, like from the Rashtrakutas and other kingdoms nearby. Pattinapale explains that when the goods landed at the seaports, were impressed with a seal bearing the royal emblem, which would be removed after the payment of customs duty by the merchants. Verumparnatrapade mentions that tolls are collected on the trunk roads used by caravans and at the frontier of each kingdom. Land tax was levied as 1/6 of the produce from the land and could be paid either in cash or in kind as per the desire of the farmer. The state supplied water for agricultural lands and collected a separate cess from the farmers. Apart from these, war booty, tribute from chieftains, professional taxes, forest produce, and other cess levied now and then brought revenue into the royal treasury. Now, the early inscriptions of the Pallavas do not speak about governing body, but they suddenly start appearing in inscriptions issued in the 8th century CE. Actually, this is around the time that the Pallava rule comes to an end. It is to be noted that local self-government attained its zenith during the days of the Cholas, when the village assemblies were entrusted with substantial local powers. But it had its roots in the earlier period and it developed the later Pallava period. I say roots in the earlier period, meaning Sangam literature. For administration purposes, the Pallava kingdom is divided into smaller units. Village is the smallest unit of administration. It had its own self-government, which was known as Sabha or Gana. Members of the village assembly were known as Urar. Cross-reference from a Pallava inscription, Grant, makes us understand that the Sanskrit term Gramyaka is equivalent to Urar. As you know, Pallavas left a lot of inscriptions in Sanskrit. So we have Sanskrit and Tamil, and this is a cross-reference which suggests that both were the same. Now, the village assembly, which depended on the population of the village, was called Sabha and Mahasabha, and its members were known as Perumakkal. Members of the village assembly looked after temple maintenance, irrigation, tank maintenance, and justice. Varyams are committees or subcommittees of an assembly or sabha. There are inscriptional references available for the activity of these committees in the Pallava period. These Varyams and Ganas looked after the rural administration related to the construction and maintenance of tanks, irrigation channels, land endowments, etc. The inscriptions at Ukkal, Uttarameru, Thiruvattriyur, Manali, Adambakam, and Thiruvipuram list the activities carried out by the committees during the reign of Nandivarman Pallavamala, the 8th century. The village assembly assigned particular works to be looked after by a group of committee members. These groups identified with the prefix of the responsibility of each group, like Erivaryam is the committee in charge of water bodies, and Totavaryam in charge of lands, and so on. These committees continued to function in the later Pallava period, and we learn that more of such specialized committees were formed, which looked after the rural administration as local self-bodies. A 10th century inscription of Kampavarman Pallava refers to an annual committee called Samvatsara Varya Perumakkal. We also find several variations of terms related to the committee members of the Sabha, called Varya Perumakkal, Ganattar, Alunganattar, Gada Perumakkal, and Amrita Ganattar. Ganattar were council members. The smallest unit of their administrative body, that is, the Ganattars enjoyed the freedom of local self-government. Now let's come to the Chola period, which is very interesting. Here the system of local self-government attained its peak. Village assemblies enjoyed tremendous freedom and power. And I think this freedom has existed from Pallava times, but we do not have enough information of the Pallava period, whereas we do of the Chola. The Chola period, the settlements of Brahmanas were known as Mangalam, Chaturvedi Mangalam, and Brahmadeyam. And these villages were administered by sabhas. While the settlements of the merchant community were known as Nagaram and Manigramam, and hence we have the Nagarattar community, and they had their own local assembly called Nagaram and Ganams. The settlement of peasants was known as Ur, and the local assembly was also called, which looked after the village administration. As mentioned earlier, like the Nadu, was not only a place, but also an assembly mentioned in inscriptions as Uram and Pravai. Ur was historically much later to the Sabha. Another important matter to be noted is that during this period, the temple served as a social institution that administered many endowments, particularly land grants. Hence, many inscriptions studded on the walls of the temples speak about the activities of these temples, of these assemblies that were associated with the temple, like maintaining the lands donated to the temple, rearing cattle donated for ghee and oil, gold deposited for maintenance, and so on. Villages earlier had a local administrative system of which may have changed to Sabha when the ownership changed by orders of the king. However, Ur remained within the Sabha. From the inscriptional sources of the Cholas, we come to know that the complex machinery of local administration and functions of a Sabha were executed through its committees called Varyams. The executive committees members of the Sabha called the Varya Perumakkal. Now this, I think, is the highlight of the, let's come back. Uttaramerur inscription. Uttaramerur inscription of circa 919 and 921 of the Chola king Arantaka I is an amazingly detailed epigraph with information about local self-government. Just a moment, I enable. Cuts off the top. See. The inscription describes in detail the constitution and rules for contesting elections by individuals to the committees which administered the Vidya Sabha. Now, Uttaramerur was a Brahmana settlement, that is a Chaturvedi Mangala. So a restriction was made that the members of the committees must be proficient in the Vedas and Vedangas because they were employed by the king for that reason. They were selected by lots or Kudavolai. As per the inscription, the Sabha adopted a resolution fixing the method of appointing members to its Varyams, or executive committees, of which 5 were named. The Samvatsara Varyam, or the annual committee, Tota Varyam, Land and Garden Committee, Eri Varyam, Tank and Irrigation Committee, Panchavarna Varyam, and Varyam, so on. It's not. A fair representation of committee members in the village assembly. Village was divided into 30 wards, or I'm sorry, this is giving some trouble. Members had to be nominated by each ward according to the rules and regulations of the Sabha. Major criteria for contesting the election were age, education, conduct, and that the aspirant should be a taxpayer. The tenure of these committees was for 1 year, and a person who served past years could not contest the election the next 3 years. The other
We could use some of these. We could use some of these today, Dr. Krishna.
could use many of these. I think so. Especially the fact, about their behavior, their conduct, their education, and so on. So the other education framed by the Varyams was that the contestants should own the following: a piece of land of more than quarter valley, which should be taxable; a house built on his own land. He should be aged between 35 and 70 years. He should be educated in the Vedas and Brahmanas and should be able to teach them to others. If a contestant had a land smaller than what was prescribed, which was well versed in the Vedas and the Bhashya, his name could be nominated by writing it on a palm leaf and putting it in the ballot pot. Apart from the requirements, those mentioned having these qualifications, such as expertise in business and to be known for one's virtues, honest earnings, and pure mind, all these were definitely required. So, now, there were some more rules. Those who had served in any of the committees for the past 3 years and did not submit their accounts, and that of all their family members, that is, paternal relatives, maternal relatives, father-in-law and family, mother-in-law and family, brother-in-law and family. I think most of our politicians would be out if they had to go through these rules. So these people could not stand again. Those who committed any of the 4 great sins mentioned in the text, those who were imprudent, those who had stolen the properties of others, those who had eaten forbidden foods, those who had committed sins and become pure by performing expiatory ceremonies, all these people were banned from standing. And apart from these, the name of all the others from the various kudumbas were written on a palm leaf and put inside the pot. The Uttaramerur inscription clearly states that the election of the committee members should be made in front of the entire village residents, young and old. The priests of all the temples had to be present during the election. A pot, which was like we have a ballot box today, they had a ballot pot, had to be shown to the gathering of the village by one of the eldest priests for authenticity. After which the first bundle of a wad had to be put inside the pot and shuffled well. A young innocent boy, by innocent they mean before he gets corrupted and he also knows how to buy and sell people, a little child really, had to take a leaf from the pot, palm leaf. When the young boy handed over the palm leaf to the arbitrator, palm of the arbitrator had to be fully open. He had to show his empty hand to everybody. Then he had to read out the name in the leaf loudly, and the same was read by all the priests in the assembly. After selecting 30 members, committees were formed. The persons who had already served on the Tank and Garden Committee, 12 highly learned elderly, formed the annual committee, the Samvatsara Varyam. The remaining 12 members formed the Totavaryam, Garden or Land Committee. The balance 6 members were chosen to be part of the Tank Committee, Eri Varyam. These 3 committees had to serve for a period of 360 days and then retire. The inscription further mentions that when one who is on a committee is found guilty of any offense, he should be removed at once. Another example of handling the situation of Rajadroha and Deshadroha occurred in a territory known as Adayur Nadu, as described in a 13th century inscription belonging to the Chola period, Chengam. Records that to interrogate the betrayal by the chieftain's sons, mind you, representatives of all the social groups from the territory were invited to the assembly. The assembly included territorial commanders, legal professionals, army commanders, heads of mercantile guilds, revenue officers, heads of artisan guilds, agricultural guilds, hunters, Brahmins, and all other communities and castes, including the Parayas, the Parnars, the Shakir, and others. This throws very valuable light on how the Constitution was drafted to give equal importance to all the people in the society. Nobody was left out because of his caste or profession. There are details in the Manur inscription that appear to anticipate many of the details of the Uttarameru epigraph of Parantaka I, dated a century later. The Manur inscriptions do not furnish any data as to how members of the assembly were chosen and how the committees were constituted. The Uttarameru record relates to the constitution of various subcommittees to serve the Sabha, while the Manur record relates to the constitution of the law. Manur royal officer was present. The Sabha met and took the decision. But in Uttarameru, a royal officer was present. Manur knowledge of Dharma Shastra was stipulated along with Mandra lawyers and Brahmanas for those who serve as Mandraduvar. Both Manur and Uttarameru records prescribed virtuous conduct. Suvattar in Manur and Acharashila in Uttarameru, which is invariably mentioned in the Dharma Shastras. The committee members of the local bodies, that is the Sabha and Varyam, consisted of unpaid part-time workers. There was a class of paid officials who worked full-time and appointed subject to the immediate authority of the Sabha and eventually to the king. Don't forget that the Sabhas paid tax to the king, but on a day-to-day basis, they were governed locally. On important occasions, a royal official was present at the meetings of the assembly and represented the views of the government. For example, if the king wanted one village to send him for the army to go to war, so, they may just meet on their own and say, no, thank you. So the royal officer had to be present to convince them. And to supervise and overlook the activities of the Sabha, few workers were appointed by the government. They were paid by the village administration. To look after the taxable lands and collect taxes periodically, two officials were appointed by the king, the Kaniyalan and the Tanduvan. These officials conveyed royal orders to the village and collected revenues. Urarvan and Nagararvan were two official heads of the city. Village, stop this. Get rid of this. Sorry. The village. It's not moving. Okay. Village administration, which was elected and autonomous, declined after the Chola and the later Pandya periods, that is after 1300 BC. Tamil Nadu after that was under continuous attack by the neighboring kings of the Hoysalas and the Vijayanagara, followed by the Mughal Empire. Vijayanagara Empire centralized imperial administration to such a degree that it swallowed up the autonomy of the villages and substituted feudal Nayaka rule instead. Governments had no use for the decentralized village administration, which native Tamil rulers had nurtured keenly for long. The village Sabha and the system of autonomous and rural government yielded place to semi-military outposts manned by the Ayakar and the Palayakar. Palayakar are the polygars, and they are the ones like Veerapandi Kattabomman went to war against the British. British, of course, dealt the final death blow by taking over ownership of all common properties and appointing collectors and bureaucrats, whose role was to collect taxes of agricultural produce and other products, thereby enriching the coffers of the East India Company and then the British Crown. So the village administration, which was elected and autonomous, had declined after the Cholya and later Pandya periods. This is completed, I'm sorry. It's not. Okay. So I want to end by saying that the entire system of village governance disappeared after this period, after the British came. And in fact, it has had a very disastrous effect on the economy itself, because there were, for example, a system of managing the yeris, water bodies. All that went away because the British controlled it. Any land for which ownership could not be belonged to the British as after the East India Company came. So slowly the people had no say in the administration and they had no control over their properties. So this is what happened after the arrival of the British. So thank you. I'm sorry for all the problems that came in between. This is an example that technology lets you down when you need it very much. Thank you.
Not at all, Dr. Krishna. You brought in fascinating details, which was well worth the time and patience to go through your wonderfully structured presentation. Thank you so much for not just presenting it, sharing your insights today, but also writing this important paper. And as you mentioned earlier, that this should perhaps have been done a long time ago. And as a person who's lived in India and in Tamil Nadu for 3/4 of my life, a lot of what you presented today, I'm listening to it for the first time. So I think there is perhaps a great need for such information to be, accessible and available. And we thank you very much for making time today to share your knowledge and expertise in this matter. So if there are any questions specific to Dr. Krishna's presentation, and let me repeat that, if there are any questions specific to the presentation, I request people to use the benefit of the Q&A box. Please keep the questions specific and short if possible. And we'll just be around for a couple of minutes to see if there are any questions. There is one person who has raised his hand.
Yes, Dr. Somashekar.
Yeah, okay, Dr. Somashekar. Yeah.
No, I am Professor Sudarshan Rao.
Dr. Rao, that's why I said Dr. Rao.
Sorry, Professor
That's
Sudarshan.
fine, that's fine.
I think both of you had.
Namaskar,
Wonderful to
madam.
see you online, sir. Namaskar.
I'm glad that I could go through the entire talk that you have given on the local self-government.
Thank you.
Of course, with a little difference, we can also find in the other areas and the regions also, in the south particularly.
No, this book, sir, excuse me, this book covers every state in India. The tradition. I'm only speaking about Tamil Nadu
Wonderful.
because I wrote about
that I have
Tamil
not seen
Nadu.
that book.
The
I have
book
not seen
was
that paper.
published by ICHR, and it's called the India, the Mother of Democracy.
Wonderful.
And every state is covered. The traditions.
I have not
of
come across
each and
that book.
every
That's the reason. I think a comparative and a study should have been taken on this.
Dr. Rao, the book was published in 2022 November. The publication is a little recent, and so perhaps you might not have seen, but it's an ICHR publication. Please go ahead.
But there is only one problem I come across with this local government, because you have mentioned about the Uttar Meru. It has become very popular, of course. It is discussed everywhere. And in the Uttar Meru also, the election process. The election process is something that that is unique. And particularly, I think that it was only meant for that particular village or that particular area, because we do not find any such parallel, perhaps in other areas, either in the south or north or anywhere. I have not come across about any source of that. Because the other things, of course, we can take from the other Shastra, and then we can also compare this, and the little differences are there in the regional areas. But this is
No,
one.
I'd like to, sorry, can I just interrupt here?
Please,
and say,
please. That's why I'm asking you.
No, I mentioned Mannur, Kaveri Pakam. This was a practice in all the villages in the Ur. So this was not limited to Uttaramerur. Uttaramerur, of course, has a detailed description of what was done. But other places also, at Ukkal, Tiruvattriyur, Manali, Adambakam, Tiruvippurambedu, and all this goes on. We have many other villages where this tradition existed. But Uttaramerur gives the inscription in detail, which is why I have gone into Uttaramerur, because it is inscriptional evidence.
Process. Particularly the election process. That
it was done everywhere, sir.
Either in the literary sources or in the inscriptions. The process is not available to us about your qualifications of the candidates and all that. No, there's a detailed version there in Uttar Meru.
Yes.
This, of course, we don't have parallel in other areas. And it's another important question that I have on this is, this particular area where you have said Uttar Meru inscription is only pertaining to those villages where only it is inhabited by the Brahmin community.
Sir, they are also people. And in a place like Mannur, excuse me, in a place like Mannur, they had the same system with all the castes, and they all combined. So it so happened that Uttaramerur, for some reason, whoever decided that they will put down the inscriptions in detail did so. But what I'm saying is, this is a system that was followed in medieval Tamil Nadu.
Sure. It's only about the committees and then the administrative structure. It may be common everywhere, but this particular process of election to the committees, the details are only in the Uttar Meru.
Yes.
And that Uttar Meru was only meant for the Brahmin community. So the problem is why Uttar Meru is known as Uttar Meru.
Yes, but you see, it is Uttaramerur. It is one more Ur. So all the Urs have the same system. You can't have different systems because it was under the king. The king had to permit the system. So that is where democracy ended in a way, because the king's this thing was there. But any town like Manur, which had Ur, came under the same system. It just because there is no inscriptional evidence doesn't mean it's not there. But I know that the system of Varyams and all existed in every village. Even
Yes.
now,
Yes.
they still say
The
Varyam.
committees are there, very common.
You know, now but the panchayat and all, they have committees called Varyams. Today, my village still
Correct.
has Varyams.
Right, right.
Correct.
No, I have no objection about this structure. Structure is almost uniform with a little difference
Yeah.
from village to village. That's fine. So thank you, madam. Thank you very much
Thank you, sir.
for the nice
There,
presentation.
there are, thank you, Dr. Rao. I've shared the link with you separately, Dr. Rao, for the book, since you mentioned that you had not come
No, I
across
know
it.
that the book has come, but I have not
Okay.
read the book. Yeah.
Okay, great. So there is one question in the Q&A box. Maybe we could just take Nanditha ji, if you're also able to see it,
Yeah,
from Annapurni VV. Thanks for the wonderful presentation. You have mentioned that all communities were represented in the assembly as per. Is there any mention about women and LGBTQ communities represented in
no
the assembly?
women, no LGBTQ. But you see, some of those men may have been LGBTQ. Those days, they never said what they were. So we don't
I'm
know.
afraid, madam, I'm afraid.
Also, I think it is a, even if one were to look into the Greek sources, for instance, it was not that Greek had an all-encompassing democracy, universal democracy like we had right now. So we are talking about different periods, and I think while we can look back for evidence of what might constitute today's democracy, and that's not just one thing, it has
Yes.
many facets. I think, like Dr. Krishna carefully avoided, we should not project our present into the past and expect everything of that to be there. They're all different periods, so we can see what we can learn from what is there.
Right
Nature
at the
of
beginning, I
democracy,
mentioned.
the nature of democracy would be changing. It's not just what you find today as democratic. This may not be appearing there. The things are very different.
Right at the beginning, I mentioned that there was no mention of women, even women rulers, except
Absolutely, you did.
Megasthenes. And that, I think, is a fairly authentic mention of the Queen Pandya who built and ruled Madurai, because I've done a lot of research on that. And I've
Correct.
come across a lot of reasons to believe that there is a tradition of it.
Correct.
Became
And it
the-
was
Yeah, go
correct,
ahead.
absolutely, Dr. Krishna. And it perhaps doesn't help, I mean, doesn't hurt to keep in mind that ours as a civilization has seen a lot of, injury and attacks, and a lot of time has passed. We don't know what we have lost. We don't know, we haven't yet decoded everything that are still in our
Absolutely.
manuscripts. So I think it doesn't hurt to be a little careful when we are judging our past by our present standards, keeping in mind that there could have been wear and tear, there could have been losses which are organic, there are clearly inorganic losses because of destruction. So we can be a little kind to our to our past. Any other question? That is just,
Dr.
I'm not sure if there's a
Somashekar-
question here. Yeah.
Dr. Somashekar put up his hand. Yes, sir.
Yes.
Unmute yourself.
Can you hear me, madam?
Yes, now I can.
Yeah, madam, congratulations on such a
Thank
wonderful
you.
presentation.
Sir.
Madam is the vice chairperson of Indian Art History Congress, and we are very happy about it also. Madam, I have just one small question. One of the qualifications to contest in the election was to be a taxpayer,
Yes.
as per the Uttar Merur inscription. And comparatively, soon after the great French Revolution, in the process of the evolution of democracy, there also we see the prescription of paying tax to be a voter and to contest in the election. What could be the rationale behind it? Can you make a comparative study or something like that?
Well, let me first go back to Aristotle defined democracy And one of the definitions he gave for a person, for a voter, is that he should own land and pay tax. So Uttaramerur, what they said was what was said in ancient Greece. So I don't think the Uttaramerur scribe had gone to Greece or knew what the Greeks said, but he had the same idea. But I think the main thing is probably because, here I'm making a guess, probably because a person who owned land, owned a house, was educated would be slightly more responsible. That's all I can think of, but they don't, nowhere is there a reason why a person should be educated or why he should be a taxpayer, why he should own property. But even today, if a person, we know that he's earning and he doesn't pay tax, we don't have too much respect for such a person.
Thank you, madam. Thank you.
That's something. Yes.
With regard to these qualifications, madam,
Yes.
just Dr. Somsekhar has spoken about this tax thing as a qualification. Because there also in the Uttaramerur, he should be a taxpayer. Yeah. But in the present democracies, Mr. Kalyan Sundaramji, the problem is the non-taxpayers are dominating the taxpayers here. So
that's another situation.
Taxpayers being a minority, they are dominated by the majority. That is democracy. Present democracy is that. So they dictate how much we should pay. Yeah.
Can I just say one more thing? That
Please.
in many places, they don't necessarily have taxpayers. They have the elders of, elders of the elders of the village.
Sure.
They were the ones who could be in the variums.
And also that, they should be a learned people.
Yeah, when you say elders,
people, they are
senior
qualified. Learned people. And also the taxes, of course, secretary for all the other things, householders. For the other people, the elders and then scholars, they are exempted from this.
Right.
So that was the democracy at that time.
But the thing is, what is important in this part is that at the village level, there was democracy. In fact, I don't remember which of the Sangam texts it is, but it mentions how farmer continues to till his land while two different kings are fighting each other. That was some kind of thing they were doing, whereas that did not affect the village and the working. So villages were quite self-sufficient in their own way. They were managing themselves. So that is what I think is very important, because today it's possible to sit in Delhi and rule Kanyakumari. It's not difficult. But in those days, you did not have the communication means and all. So every village had to manage itself. And that is why self-government was very important. And on the other hand, in North India, they did not have it in the medieval, especially have the Islamic. They were very authoritative. They were the ones who made the decisions, took the taxes, did whatever they want, gave mansabdars to who they wanted, gave lands, that kind of thing. But if the king gave a gift of a Brahmadeyam, it would be to a whole group of scholars, not to one individual who favored and that kind of thing in South India. And when I say South India, I mean the whole of South India. So I think in the North, did not have this this democracy because of the situation of the rulers, kind of people they were, the kind of traditions they had, which was fairly absolute, which was not there in the South. I mean, the king may send a representative, but the villagers decided what they wanted.
You qualified that by saying in the medieval particular, right? In the northern. Okay, great. So
I can add one more thing here. Because, farmer was not just a farmer or a tenant. No. He was the land owner. The one who has been tilling the land The landowner itself. Even the state is not the landowner. State has no rights on the farming lands. They can only collect the peshkash, what we call the revenue tax. That's the only thing. Even the officers should be there only to collect the tax. But no, they are not the owners. These property rights were described only in the 1830s and 1840s. That's by the British company. So
Yes.
then they have made it a landed property. Land has become a property. And so that it can be auctioned off into jamindaris and all that. So this has come only from 1830. Still then, land was owned by the raids, the farmers. That's all. So the
Yes.
state has nothing to do with the changing the property rights of the individual holders of the land.
See, the village was a settlement of peasants, and the local assembly was also of the Ur looked after the administration. The Ur, like the Nadu, was not only a place but also an assembly. So that is important. It was historically anterior to the Sabha. So it was much earlier than the Sabhas, and we should be aware that it was different from the Sabha. And the members were called, I mentioned it, Arvargal. They did not need educational qualifications. Dr. Somashekar, you had asked, the members of the Ur did not require any qualifications or education or something. They had to be senior, respectable people and so on. And the temple was also the social institution which administered land grants. So there are many, many inscriptions, apart from Uttara Meru, which has gone into great detail, many inscriptions all over Tamil Nadu. You can pick up South Indian inscriptions. They are all over the temples, talk about the activities of these assemblies and associated, and especially the temple, which was associated in maintaining land donated to the temple, rearing cattle and so on. So I have talked about Uttara Meru because nobody goes into such detail, no other inscription. But there are tons of inscriptions. I mean, I could have been the sole author of the whole book of a village of local self-governance, because that is how widespread it was in Tamil Nadu. And I'm sure in other parts of South India also, it was equally widespread, because all these places had similar traditions. As I said, the kings had nothing to do but to fight with each other. People went on their lives.
So, right. Thank you so much, Dr. Krishna, for making time today and for sharing your insights. And I thank everybody who joined us today for this conversation. And we look forward to more from you, Dr. Krishna, on these topics and related topics in the future. Wishing you the best. Namaskar.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Namaskar.
Thank you.